Welcome to Everything Life Coaching. I'm John Kim.
And I'm Noelle Cordeaux. We are the founders of JRNI Coaching.
We're super passionate about all things coaching and want to share what we've learned from over a decade of coaching and training over 1,000 life coaches.
Dive deep into a more meaningful career, find freedom, and make an impact on the world around you.
Hey guys, on today's episode, we're going to talk about recognizing and overcoming internal bias as a coach. And if that sounded like Chinese to you, then this is going to be a great episode. Noelle.
This is why I'm here, to translate information.
So this is a big topic. It sounds very complicated.
It is a big topic. It is complicated. And it's also really important for our time, as you know, the entire world is shifting to a different way of understanding ourselves, each other, how we relate to each other. And coaching is so often understood as something that's fluffy. And when we really look under the hood, coaching is an absolutely psychodynamic approach to basically giving us a user's guide to how our brains and bodies work. And today we're going to drill down on just an introduction to the topic of bias, how it works and how it works in coaching, really specifically.
So what exactly is internal bias, would you say?
Yeah. So internal bias functions in lots and lots and lots of different ways. And the starting point that we're going to take to understand it is, all right, when we're talking about coaching and we're thinking about the fact that humans are stuck, the root of that stuckness is usually simply a lack of access to an alternative way of seeing things, that we only have one way of seeing things. We only have one story that we tell ourselves about any given situation. And in a nutshell, that's bias.
Yeah. So the word that comes to my mind is perspective, seeing the world only through our own lenses.
Only through our own lenses, and taking for granted that lens is telling us the truth, that lens has the best information for us.
Right. And you as a coach, you're not giving someone else your lenses, right? You're not telling your client, hey, this is how you should see the world. Instead, you are exploring and giving the client a new perspective based on the process.
Absolutely. And not only are we, checking our own lens at the door, we need to understand how, as coaches, we're naturally subject to the stories that we tell ourselves over and over again. And then when we work with clients, we flip that mirror around and we help our clients see the very same, very human ways that they are subject to the stories that they've been telling themselves.
This is also why you can't really process or coach yourself. I mean, you can to a certain extent, but when it comes to exploring, getting fresh perspective, because we could only see through our own lenses, it's hard to like pull yourself out of that.
I'm going to give you a yes and on that front. When we're dealing with this topic, it is something that we can, with active intention, work ourselves through. The problem is that most folks don't have access to this learning, don't have access to this way of thinking about their own brains. And we need to educate people. Hey, this is how your brain works. This is how your client's brain works. We can all do this. Of course, two brains are better than one. But this is pretty much universal for all humans.
Yeah, and it depends on the brain as far as two being better than one. Yeah.
Well, no, not at all. So, let's get into it. At baseline, so here's where this sounds sciencey and complicated, right? So at baseline, every second, our brain takes in hundreds of billions of bits of information every second, but we can only bring to our consciousness 44 pieces of information.
Wow.
That's a big divide.
Yeah. It's just it's like I'm seeing a grain of sand in, if you're standing on the beach, you're only picking up a grain of sand.
Yes, absolutely. And the important thing that we need to know here is that implicit in our humanity, the way that our brains picks and chooses what information to bring to the fore of our consciousness is in itself a form of bias.
Mm.
It's called the availability heuristic. And it's very important to understand for coaching. And basically, what this is it's the fact that your brain creates shortcuts. There is so much information in the world that when our brain perks up and is like, oh, holy shit, I can't take in hundreds of billions of bits of information. I only need 44. So the brain takes a shortcut and hones in only on the information that has been already primed in our brain due to previous exposure.
Let me ask you this: how much of what we decide to pick up is based on our story?
Almost all of it.
Yeah, yeah, and I knew the answer to that, but I wanted you to say it because um, my whole thing with coaching is narrative, is using our stories.
And using our stories is really important, but how does it change things for you with the piece of knowledge that your brain is only going to provide you with information based on what you've previously seen and heard?
Right. Yeah. So that's the trick: is how do you, how do you jump the tracks? How do you break patterns? And for me, that's why I think I put a lot of emphasis on giving yourself a new experience. No matter how small or big that new experience is.
And you're spot on. And stories, understanding our story and storytelling is also incredibly important in this process, where we need to understand the role of this repetition is that what we internalize becomes a rule for us. And this puts us at a disadvantage when there are other pieces of information that we have not heard before that might be better for us to take in, like something that is working or solutions to problems, or if the original information that we are holding just is not true. So the way that this works, or another way to think about this, is what we choose to bring into our consciousness based on previous experience creates the stories that we tell ourselves about every single facet of our existence.
Mm. Now, I know we talk about social construct in our webinars. How much of that you think plays into this? What we decide to pick up?
Almost all of it.
Well, it can't be almost all of it because you said our story is almost all of it. They're both almost
But
all.
those are the same thing. So, social
Mm,
construction is the story that we tell ourselves about every single facet of our existence, right?
mm, mhm.
So, I'm gonna pull up an example. It's a timely example, and then I want to deconstruct it and explain what's going on in our brains, right? So, before I start my story, there's a part of the brain that's called the medial orbitofrontal cortex. Medial orbitofrontal cortex. And this baby gets activated when you experience pleasure or an experience of rightness. And we really like it. So when our expectation for the world around us, in other words, the story that we've told ourselves, is somehow confirmed, that's how your met expectations turn your story into a reality, right? So
Mhm.
that's the setup. So when we look out into the world and we say, hey, I know something, it feels good. And then when reality meets our expectations, in other words, we confirm that story for ourselves based on 44 out of 100 billion bits of information that may or may not be true. That's how we confirm bias, essentially. So there has been a long-standing myth that people of color just aren't nature lovers. And there has been a persistent myth that Black and Brown people care less about environmental issues,
Yeah.
when in fact, all of the studies that are out there show that this is absolutely not true, right?
Right.
So here we have this story that's sitting out there, and a lot of people believe it. and you go to a national park and we look around and we're like, oh my God, almost everybody here is white. For the untrained eye, that might seem to confirm this story. And now this myth is perpetuated over time.
Yeah.
So let's pull back, knowing that we can only take in 44 bits of information every second out of billions, and look at the history and try to contextualize where this myth came from, how it works, and how it gets cemented in our consciousness. So when we're looking at the history, in the United States, Black people for centuries were totally violently displaced from their native lands, as is Indigenous people as well, through
Hmm.
colonialism and slavery. And then as we move through time, racial segregation and discriminatory housing practices ensured that people of color literally had less access to green spaces and parks.
Mm.
So all of the recent studies are showing us that Black people are 68% more likely to live in nature deprived areas. And then if we look at our counterparts in Europe, people of color make up only 1% of visitors to national parks, right? So
Right.
this is problematic. And now let's look at the lived experience of people of color when they go into nature. We had that case of the gentleman who was bird watching and had the cops called on him. We have experienced collective trauma as a Black man was shot while running.
Mm.
Black folks are objectively harassed by park rangers when they go into parks asking, why are you here? So again, here we are, bits of information that are confirming this myth. And we go back again to the beginning of, how did we get here?
Yeah, so it's almost like consciously or subconsciously believing the story that they don't belong here, kind of thing.
Or that folks of color don't like nature.
Yes, yes, and it's not that they don't like nature; they kind of just was never exposed or allowed into that environment.
And that over centuries have been objectively and systemically disenfranchised from access.
Right.
I mean, it's a very, very, very different setup. And so, as you're sitting here, as you're listening, as we're all listening to this, I challenge you to say, hey, have my words actually tripped up against something internally that you're like, oh, yeah, I did hold that belief. I did think that that
Hmm.
thing was true. And maybe, just maybe, the historical implications of how we got here can change the story. It's not that folks of color don't enjoy nature. It's that they have been through structural and systematic oppression barred from accessing it in the US and Europe,
Right. And as
right?
you're listening to this, think about because that's just one example and such a clear example. But think about how many internal biases we have, all of us,
All of us.
so
So let's
much.
take another one because I think, again, with storytelling, this is a great way in. So as we're thinking about, these evolutionary traits that have kept these stories in place, what we have to understand is that pulling it back to an individual level, these are the mindsets and ways of thinking that literally limit our ability to change and evolve further. Every innovation that has like ever taken place has come with someone's willingness to question, experience discomfort, and do things differently. So what do we do with this, right? What do you think, John? Like as you're kind of letting this sink in, and I have the benefit of having lived with this information for a long time, but as I'm nailing you with it, what are you experiencing?
I think there's two pieces. One is awareness, right? I mean, I think awareness is kind of the beginning of everything. Being aware of what's happening internally, how you see the world, perspective, stories, all of that. And then there's this other piece, and this is where most people I think drop the ball, and that's execution. Like you just
Mhm.
said, what do you do with this, awareness revelation? Because that's 50% now. What do you do with it? Um, and yeah, and that's I mean there are so many different ways you can go with this, but I think the execution piece is what's really important to rewire or to tell yourself a different story.
Yes. Yes. All right. So let's get into the application of it. So, step one is to at first draw to your own conscious awareness. Hey, these stories pop up everywhere and most of us can't see them. The fact that these stories are so common and we can't see them is called illusion of validity bias,
Mm-hmm.
illusion of validity. And this creates this phenomenon where we create stories and patterns even in sparse data. And this happens because our brains need to make sense of whatever is showing up in the present moment. And the brain doesn't care if the story is not true. It just doesn't. So, step one is we have to ask ourselves, did I just tell myself a story?
We fill in the blanks a lot
Yeah,
without knowing the facts.
without knowing the facts. So here's another example. Let's say, me and you in an alternate universe work in a big company in an office in a 9 to 5 and we wear suits every day. That sounds really terrible, but just play along with me here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're walking down the hall and we see all of our bosses in a meeting and they're having this really heated conversation. So both you and I would come up with a totally different story of what's going on in that room based on our different experiences.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Some, maybe one of us would think it's about us, maybe, yeah, it all depends on our story and what the experiences that we've had in the past.
Yeah. And so step one is to notice that there's a story there.
Mm-hmm.
So, some coaching questions that you can use to avoid letting a story sink in. And this is actually a really important factor for relieving stress in a lot of different environments because the stories that we tell ourselves are bullshit and create stress. So, do I have enough information to confirm the story that I just presented to myself?
Right. Do I have
And this
proof?
do I have proof? And so this is such a powerful, coaching question or a question that we can use for ourselves. So think about like any relationship. So, when I speak to my friends, my family, my clients, if somebody's in a partnered relationship and you're expecting a phone call from your person and your person just never calls, it's the number one thing that'll take you from 0 to psychopath in about 15 seconds.
Yeah, of course, because we're already jumping in the future and, filling a lot of blanks on why they're not calling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So whatever it is, whether this person's, cheating on you or lying dead in a ditch somewhere, do I have any information to confirm the story that I just presented to myself?
Right. No.
Nope. And then here's the big hack. And this one comes to us from the University of Wisconsin that runs a bias and prejudice laboratory. And it's such a cool one. And I think we've talked a little bit about it before, but it's simply to tell yourself a different story,
Mm,
to challenge your own assumptions. So to actually say, well, if I don't have enough information to confirm the story that I just told myself, what would another interpretation of this situation be? And so you could take the long view, like I did with a myth that folks of color don't enjoy nature and actually take the time to research the historical context to literally disprove the myth. Or you could simply offer yourself another explanation. And what that does in practice is loosen the fear chokehold in your brain of that original story.
yeah, it's like starting your sentences with, what if, or maybe it's this. It's like
Mhm.
loosening things that you just naturally default to that you think are facts, and that may not be true. So, being curious, exploring instead of just going from here's what I think without any facts and then swallowing that.
Yes. Yes. And I can't stress enough that, number one, you just have to get good at being like, ooh, this might be a story. And number two, can I tell myself a different one? And
Mm,
and that 1-2 punch, as simple as it is, will let your brain know, oh, I need to look for more information. That 44-point data set isn't going to work here. Let's see if I can take in a little bit more. And that's how we evolve.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great reminder today. And, this alone can be, um, this one concept, this one topic can be a way that you coach if you just focus on this. Like this is so common, and we all have biases that you can use this technique only, and you'll still be helping so many with their internal life bias in life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can help yourself too. When you're sitting with a client and you make an assumption, you're not wrong or bad. This is your brain. We all have them. Am I telling myself a story? Yep. Can I tell a different one? Yep. Okay. Move on with your life.
Yeah. Well, if you're interested in this topic and want to go deeper, come check us out at journey.co. And hopefully that this is, we've planted a seed where as you go throughout your week, you should kind of check in with yourself and see internally where you have biases.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't believe everything you think, guys.
Yeah. All right, guys, be well. Thanks for listening to Everything Life Coaching. If you're feeling the draw to become a coach, head to journey.co/everything to explore a new career that brings fulfillment, gives you a true sense of purpose, and a strong community to do it in. We created Journey Coaching to equip you with the tools, training, and community you need to attain your goals.
Join Journey Coaching and begin your journey towards personal freedom and a transformative state of growth today. That's JRNI.co/everything.